Chapter 11. Italy, Part 1. Italy, at last. Felix wrote home after the carriage crossed the border. He felt he had accomplished much by making it to the country he ever so desired to see. Now knowing this was Italy, the land felt as if it were bursting with fleets. Felix intended to reach the city of Venice. The way there would be a bit of a trip yet. The vetturino agreed to get him as far as he could. There were a few stops between them. Already Felix had seen a few towns and cities, stopping in fine art galleries. Each one was full of precious masterworks. There then was a long stretch of travel, and the vetturino drove at a snail's pace. Felix gave a sigh as he sat next to the coachman in the driver's bench. The only thing holding his complaints were the fresh air and achievement of reaching the country. The two horses' hooves padded against the dirt road, snorting and carrying on. As evening neared, the distance covered didn't impress Felix. The vetturino parked the carriage in a safe grassy area in the woods. Felix asked, "Surely we aren't resting now?" "The horses are hungry. I'm tired. There's an extra pillow and blanket in the back." He dismantled from the driver's seat. Felix huffed, but hopped down from the carriage to walk around. He went to the horses and petted the tired creatures. The coachman unhooked them from the cab and let them graze. "What have you for supper?" Felix questioned. The coachman shrugged. "I'm more tired than hungry. Unless you brought food, I'm not planning on finding a tavern until morning." The coachman went to the carriage to sleep. Felix turned to his luggage, not wanting to speak to the lazy man anymore. He found a jar of sauerkraut and pickled eggs to munch on. He sat near the grazing horses, making a small picnic for himself as to join them in dinner. A bottle of old savory wine completed the meal. After getting a fill, he packed everything up. By then it was growing dark. The horses were resting together in the grass as if they knew tomorrow would be another long day. Felix made sure they were settled. The vetturino rather carelessly had gone to bed, not checking if they were still fit after pulling for hours. Felix then took the blanket and pillow given to him and went to the cab. When opening it, he found the coachman taking up all of the room. His snores were loud. Felix shut the door, feeling annoyed. The night, thankfully, was beautiful and the stars were sparkling. It was chilly, but not terrible. He decided to sleep under the stars. Felix took a spot beside one of the horses and leaned the pillow against its side. He found an extra blanket to sit on the ground. After making a place to sleep, he lay down. He stared up at the sky as it looked quite beautiful. The wistful breeze then put him to sleep. Felix awoke to one of the horses nudging him with its nose. It whinnied a bit until the coachman called to him, trying to wake him. Felix opened his eyes. It felt far too soon to do as such. It was still dark. The vetturino had hooked the horses to the carriage already. He stated as Felix sat up, "We're continuing on." "What time is it?" Felix picked up the pillow and blankets. The coachman crawled onto the driver's seat. 4 in the morning. You complained of not getting far, so we shall start earlier. You can sleep in the cab." Felix gathered some lastly things and made a bed in the carriage, falling asleep once more. The horses carried on through the country at a slow pace. By mid-morning, little distance was covered. Felix stepped outside of the slow-moving cab and crawled onto the driver's bench. The coachman handed Felix the reins. "I need to stretch my legs." He hopped down from the cab and walked alongside the horses. Felix debated speeding up the horses, but figured it's not a good idea in case they became agitated. Hours later, they drove to Rescuta. There, in the town, was a bridge to cross. The vetturino mentioned, "I hope you are fluent in your Italian. No one speaks an ounce of German on the other side of the bridge." Oh, Felix felt a bit nervous. He knew fragments of Italian and could communicate, but not as well as French or English. Upon crossing the bridge, the style of houses became that of tiles, flat roofs, and deep windows. Many small chapels were scattered through the land with monks and nuns close by. Every now and again a beggar or two would follow beside the carriage, trying to get a coin or food. The coachman hurried the horses during such occasions, but always returned to the slow pace. They drove on many roads winding through the orchards. Vineyards were visible in any open plain. By evening, they found an inn settled in Udine. After purchasing a room, Felix ventured down the street and found a humble-looking restaurant. It was small and lonely, so Felix sat at the table. A waiter, happy to have a customer, gave him a menu. Felix skimmed it over. The waiter had no one else to tend to, so he eagerly sets bread and fine wine at the table. Costa vorsti mangiare? Felix's tongue skated and stumbled from English. The waiter knew not a word. Felix corrected his speech to Italian. Vorrei gli spaghetti. He pointed to what he wanted. The waiter nodded and went off to have it made. Once the food was set, the pasta couldn't have tasted better. With the wine and a dessert of gelato, it was well. Until the waiter gave the bill. It was more than what was said on the menu. Felix, slipping in his language, stated, Signore, è giusto. No, è giusto. Ti sei preso a calcolati? The waiter sounded affirmative. Felix didn't catch all of his words and tried to speak more, but after a bit he gave up in the process. The waiter smiled kindly, taking the money. Felix sighed when returning to the inn, as he knew the waiter ripped him off. The next day of Sunday, Felix and the coachman continued on to Venice. The way there brought many sights of flowers, happy people, and festivities through the villas. After covering many more dragging miles, the vetturino let Felix off at a harbor to reach Venice by boat. The rowing of the crossing to the city was calm, unlike the seas around Britain. Soon the dim lights of the city appeared. The boatman quietly rowed into the city, passing under bridges and interesting lines of houses along the canal. The further into Venice they went, the more commotion of the local people there were. He found stay in a hotel beside the canal. The window looked over the gondolas passing by with their singing gondoliers. The beautiful city gave Felix the sense of art he wished to see. He became acquainted with various local painters, as well as admiring old masterpieces. In his excitement, he could not believe he really made it to Venice. At the desk in the room, styled of the Renaissance, he penned to Zelter, telling him of his trip thus far. He eagerly wrote about the music he had come up with in his stay in Vienna before arriving to Italy. To Professor Zelter, I finished 2 pieces of sacred music in Vienna, a choral in 3 movements for chorus and orchestra, and an Ave Maria for a choir of 8 voices, a cappella. The people I associated with there were so dissipated and frivolous that I became quite spiritually minded and conducted myself like a divine among them. Moreover, not one of the best pianoforte players there, male nor female, ever played a note of Beethoven, and when I hinted that he and Mozart were not to be despised, they said, "So you are an admirer of classical music?" "Yes," said I. "Tomorrow I intend to go to Bologna to have a glance at St. Cecilia, then proceed by Florence to Rome, where I hope to arrive 8 or 10 days hence. I will then write to you more satisfactorily. I only wish to make a beginning today, and to beg you not to forget me, and kindly accept my heartfelt wishes for your health and happiness. Yours faithful, Felix." After penning to his old teacher, he turned to some family letters, reading them with enjoyment. It was hard to communicate, as it took weeks to receive letters at such a distance apart. Concerning Fanny, she was a mother. The baby was now 6 months old, but Felix still could not believe he was an uncle. She had much to do now, but wished more time for her music, yet at the same time felt too busy. Felix wrote to her. November 1830. If you had the inclination, you certainly have sufficient genius to compose, and if you have no desire to do so, why grumble so much? If I had a baby to nurse, I certainly should not write any scores, and as I have to compose non nobis, I cannot unluckily carry my nephew about in my arms. But speak seriously, your child is scarcely 6 months old yet, and you can think of anything but Sebastian, not Bach. Be thankful that you have him. Music only retreats when there is no longer a place for her, and I am not surprised that you are not an unnatural mother. Felix. Another speck of trouble besieged him as well. It was another go-around with the post, trying to send letters to friends and family. He noticed upon taking a letter for his friend de Vriant. The postman took it with much suspicion. Felix had sent a few letters here and there containing music and well wishes to his family, so he didn't understand why the postman was acting so strange towards him. The postman still took the letter, so Felix headed back to his place of stay. He couldn't help to feel that as he walked back, that he was being watched. No one was standing about in the obvious, but he knew something wasn't right. After entering his hotel room, he sat at the desk with manuscripts, a quill, and ink. He continued some music as the evening moved by, working by candlelight. In a sense, he felt a bit like Vivaldi, who was a composer in Venice back in the early 1700s. The water of the canal flowing gave a calm ambience. Some gondolas quietly rode by with their lamps. The gondoliers saved their song for daylight. His wakeful dreams were suddenly halted by a knock at the door. He set his quill down and went to answer it. In a moment he paused, wondering who it could possibly be. A strong voice then demanded, with a hard pound, "Open up now." Felix opened the door and an officer pushed his way in. A few others were behind him. Felix felt a wave of confusion as the first officer grabbed him and moved him out of the doorway. The others began searching the room and his luggage. They shuffled through the music and letters. The officer that had hold of him questioned in broken English, "What is your business?" I'm just visiting," Felix glanced as the officers began taking various manuscripts. He attempted to rush to them, but was held back. The officer stated, "You have been enclosing music and letters. It is suspected that you are sending secret ciphers in them. Who is your correspondence?" "I have none." Felix was utterly confused. He hoped they wouldn't take the large musical scores in progress. They seemed to be taking the short pieces, he noted. It was a frustration all the more. The officers told him sternly, "We shall be taking the music to the customs house. If we find anything in your letters, we shall find you. You seem nothing but young and naive, but I know such ones are used in such a manner." He let him go and they all left, taking what they wanted. After the door shut, Felix sat where he was, not believing that they really thought him to be a messenger. He had nothing to hide, but he hoped they wouldn't suspect something that they believed a secret of some sort. Ending up in prison would be a horrid thing to happen while abroad. After his shady stay in Venice, he left and ventured through Bologna to Florence. The vetturino he received for this track was much faster. He spoke much of nature as well as politics, which became quite annoying. The troubling thing of this man, though, was he stopped at terrible little inns, offering little to no food. If there was any, it was bad. It reminded Felix much of the horrid inn that Carl and he stumbled upon in Scotland. Yet this was multiple stops and days. The coachman seemed to get by fine. After tolerating a few nights of starving and little sleep, Felix finally confessed to the vetturino as they trudged through the countryside, "I need something to eat, real food." The coachman looked at him, noticing his state. "There is an inn coming up in the next few miles." He then grabbed a jar of pickled eggs to share. Felix wondered how much food the coachman had been hiding. The food in Felix's luggage had been eaten through in the days of getting no supper. As Felix took a few eggs, the vetturino put the jar away. "That's enough, I need food too." He honestly did not want to share. After a few more hours of a hard day of travel through the Apennines, they made it to a small inn. It was cold and the wind blew leaves and soot in. Felix wished for any decent meal. The innkeeper gladly took Felix's offer of money and led him to the kitchen. There a fire was burning, making it the only warm room. Others were standing about. They appeared to be peasants. The innkeeper threw a watery soup together, adding hardly any meat or vegetables to it as if being overly frugal. As it heated, Felix sat in a chair close to the fire, trying to get warm. He was expecting a hearty, filling soup as his stomach ever so begged for such. The innkeeper finally handed him a bowl of the soup. It looked like flavored water. He wanted to complain, but he needed something to get energy. Felix drank the flavorless broth. It had nothing of nutritional value. The innkeeper had cheated him with his money and expectation. It only added up as the bed was poor for a good sleep. From the moment of lying down, Felix was determined to be strict on offers. The next morning already brought another stride of hunger. The coachman woke him early in the 4th hour, pestering to continue on. Felix dressed and gathered his things. He then headed to the tavern. No breakfast was served. The coachman hurried Felix outside to the carriage. "I want to get us to Rome fast. I've business to tend to, and I imagine you do as well." "I am not in a hurry. Rather, I wanted a pleasure ride there, not tired and starved as you make the trip out to be." "Well, your pleasure of food and sleep awaits you in Rome." He climbed onto the driver's seat. Felix entered the carriage, instantly sitting down and falling asleep. When the sun came up, Felix distracted himself with Goethe's books and poems as well as music. He worked much at the Hebrides Overture and the Scottish Symphony. Lately, yet, something new came to his mind. The fast staccato of strings and flutes inspired him again. After many more miles of the horse pulling the carriage through the Italian country, the landscape turned into a grand ancient city. There were some fresh structures as well as ruins of old. They had arrived in Rome. Felix had a few letters of introduction to ensure he found good rooms. The coachman dropped him off at said address. It was an apartment complex. The 3-story building was fashioned in Italian culture, with tiled roofing and vines creeping up the side. Felix unloaded his luggage. The vetturino wished a lofty sum, but Felix kept determined to be strict, paying only what was deserved. The coachman took what Felix offered, then went on his way. Felix then walked across the cobblestone path through the main door of the apartments. Upon entering into the lobby, the landlord met him. Felix gave his letters of introduction. The landlord smiled upon looking at them and led Felix to a perfectly sound apartment on the first floor. It was beautiful, with the surprise of a grand Viennese piano in the main room. A nearby window gave a landscape of architecture and sunshine. The floors were of stone and the walls were a burnt orange in tiles, giving a sense of cultural design. The bedroom was a luxurious affair. Felix flopped onto the soft, elegant bed upon seeing it. The landlord couldn't help but smile at the young man's awe for the place. He asked in broken English, "Does this suit you?" "Es ist so schön." Felix couldn't help but speak in his mother tongue. The landlord then assured, "I'll be sure you get some lunch. You look quite hungered. Traveling here can be rough." He left. Felix still lay in bed, recollecting the fact that yesteryear ago he was in London, stuck in bed because of the carriage crash. Now he was in complete bliss at last. He enjoyed a few minutes, sprawled upon the comforting bed, breathing in the fresh air of Rome. A light knock on the door made him sit up. It was a servant with a tray of pita bread, grapes, and sausages, as well as wine to wash it all down. It felt ever so relieving to eat and drink real food. After digging into the bread and spiced sausages, he gulped down a fair serving of fine Italian wine. The servant was a bit shocked at how much the food excited him, but it was obvious how hungry Felix was. He finished it so fast the servant took it back almost as soon as setting the table. Felix still had some grapes and wine. As he snacked on the grapes and held the wine bottle, he gazed out the window. It was a nice part of the city in which he resided. The letters of introduction were what helped much. Many locals were walking about, going on with their normal routine. Felix spent the remainder of the day resting and checking out the well-built piano. He played to his content. A few servants every now and again peeked into the apartment to see who was playing such a beautiful melody. The next morning breakfast was set at the table. It was ever so comforting to begin the day with breakfast. He sipped the frothy cappuccino and ate the warm cornetti. The sun was bright and shining into the room. After breakfast it was all playing, singing, and composing. Many ideas came to mind as well as old ones. He continued to work on the Hebrides overture that he began over a year ago. It was nearing its finish. Originally he had named it The Lonely Island, but changed it to the Hebrides. The Scottish symphony still needed much work. Another symphony idea crossed his mind, distracting the progress of other works. His collection of Goethe's poems were sparking music to his ears as well. A surprise came to him as he worked at the keys. The landlord came in, handing him a letter. Felix paused the music and took it, hoping it to be from home. Instead, it was something unexpected and good. Someone he knew had arrived in Rome. His name was Charles Bunsen. He and his wife had a large home in the city in which they visited every so often. Abraham most likely informed them of Felix's day. Charles had invited Felix to dine with them in the evening. Felix, of course, wrote an accepting note. He then put his music away for the day and made plans to go sightseeing before dinner. There were grand things to see within Rome. Like in Venice, it felt surreal that he was in such a city. He remembered penning lines in his geography book back in his days at the university. That now felt like ages ago, yet at the same time the memory was as vivid as yesterday. Upon going out to sightsee, he took a carriage to the ancient Colosseum. It was large and quite extraordinary. Felix had seen many sketches of the famous structure, but it was very much different in real life. A drawing can only depict so much. That afternoon he visited the Vatican, as that was its own city within Rome. He learned much of culture and how the people viewed their government and religion. He sent letters of his observations to home for his siblings to read. As he continued on, he heard some news that the Pope was ill, and it was likely he wasn't going to live much longer. It was possible he was already dead. A new one would be elected in February. Felix was curious of how it would all go, as the season of festivities and carnival were to take place. The locals seemed to carry on with their preparations. After wandering vast ancient structures and large cathedrals, it was nearing dinner, so Felix took a cab to Herr Bunsen's abode. It was a large, vast home, full of true Renaissance decor and art. Felix took much interest in the small details carved in stone and marble. The Bunsens were a well-off family, as Charles had a sufficient occupation as a diplomat and was quite a scholar. He was younger than Abraham, but quite older than Felix. Upon entering, Mrs. Bunsen greeted Felix with much kindness. She had a fine dark green silk dress with black embroidery. She wasn't thin nor too fat, but it was noticeable that she had a well-to-do lifestyle. Charles followed soon after her. He was so very happy and told Felix in excitement, "Now we shall have more music. Another musician is here as well." "How nice." Felix shook Herr Bunsen's hand. They then went to the dining room where an array of guests sat, all very rich-looking. Felix had a nice outfit, but it didn't overdo his status. As he sat, the other guests smiled at him. Most were older, and their expression showed that they thought of him as a young, innocent child. There were 2 ladies near his age, eyeing him as the most refined of the guests. Felix sat quietly as the food was served and everyone spoke. Right away he noticed a man that spoke in a German tone. Felix didn't catch his name, and didn't wish to, as he heard his speech to the lady beside him. The naive girl laughed as the man spoke in musical terms, deeming himself a musician. Felix avoided his attention until he was pointed out by Charles. The musician asked Felix, "So you are a musical one as well?" "I play and write." Felix sipped some wine. "Ah, you are German as well." His tone was quite posh. Felix in the moment wished he were a Frenchman or anything else. This man's demeanor felt like an embarrassment. The musician continued on, trying to impress the ladies. "The art of melody is such a delicate thing. Music must be handled every day." He nodded at his own words. Everyone else agreed. "Why?" Felix questioned the man. The musician paused in his self-agreement and seemed a bit embarrassed at Felix's comment. He searched some words, then coined, "Earnest purpose is a must. I have heard your name, and heard your tuus Petrus. That has some gleams of earnest purpose." Oh, Felix felt rather fed up with this musician. He then asked him, "So what grand music is it you must be composing with such earnest purpose?" "Well, I have a lot of business with a property in Frascati. I'm about to lay down the profession of music," he confessed. Felix almost sneered at such a remark. He penned to Fanny after dinner of such a man giving up music, and exclaimed in writing, "We have not got so far as that yet." After noting some things to Fanny, Charles and the others begged Felix to the music room to play some piano. They all wanted to hear Bach's music. Felix willingly played a number of fugues and chorales. He then began talking about the various oratorios by Bach. They enjoyed learning about the one Felix conducted the year prior and what work went into it. Charles then dug something out of his music cabinet. It was a piano arrangement of another oratorio of Bach. It was the St. John Passion. Charles mentioned, "I've shown this to the papal singers, and they deem it impossible for human voices." "I think the contrary. People thought it impossible with the St. Matthew Passion. Also, I've heard there is to be a score of this one published." "Interesting." Charles nodded. The rest of the evening was filled with music. Felix's days in Rome were happy and healthy. Each day started with a good breakfast. Then he played piano and sang new Lieder to his content. He was leading a joyful little life in his room in Rome, most of the time. Letters from Abraham had been abundant upon arriving. Since Felix had found a place of stay in Rome, his father's letters had become irritable in the sense that he feared for Felix's welfare for finding a future living. He was young and carefree, but Abraham wanted his son to be serious and prepared. Felix wrote simple replies back, consenting to instructions, and sometimes carrying them through. Felix cared for his father's opinions, but at the same time, home was 2 weeks away. He tried sending music for his father, but knew with his mood his father probably wouldn't read the notes, if the music would even reach him. After more demanding notes from Abraham, Felix wrote to his siblings of the matter to help ease their father's worries and frustrations. Rome, November 22nd, 1830. My dear brother and sisters, you know how much I dislike, at a distance of 200 miles and a fortnight's journey from you, to offer good advice. I mean to do so, however, for once. Let me tell you, therefore, a mistake in your conduct, and, in truth, the same I once made myself. I do assure that never in my life have I ever known my father to write in so irritable a strain as since I have come to Rome, and so I wish to ask you if you cannot devise some sort of domestic recipe to cheer him a little. I mean by yielding to his wishes, by allowing my father's views of any subject to predominate over your own. Then not to speak at all on any topics that irritate him, and instead of saying shameful, say unpleasant, or instead of superb, very fair. This method has often a wonderfully good effect, for with the exception of the great events in the world, ill humor often seems to me to proceed from the same cause that my father's did when I chose to pursue my own path in my musical studies. He was then in a constant state of irritation, incessantly abusing Beethoven and all visionaries, and this often vexes me much, and made me sometimes very unamiable. At that very time something new came out, which put my father out of sorts, and made him, I believe, not a little uneasy. So long, therefore, as I persisted in extolling and exalting my Beethoven, the evil became daily worse, and one day, if I remember rightly, I was even sent out of the room. At last, however, it occurred to me that I might speak a great deal of truth, and yet avoid the particular truth obnoxious to my father. So the aspect of affairs speedily began to improve, and all soon went well. My father considers himself both much older and more irritable than, thank God, he really is. But it is our duty always to submit to our opinion to his, even if the truth may be as much on our side as it is often is on his, when opposed to us. Strive, then, to praise what he likes, and do not attack what is implanted in his head, more especially ancient established ideas. In short, try to smooth and equalize things. Remember that I, who am now an experienced man of the world, never yet knew any family, taking into due consideration all defect and failings, who have hitherto lived so happily together as ours. Do not send me an answer to this, for you will not receive it for a month, and by that time, no doubt, some fresh topic will have arisen. Besides, if I have spoken nonsense, I do not wish to be scolded by you, and if I have spoken properly, I hope you will follow my good advice. Your brother, most truly, Felix. Felix continued his days in Rome, spending much time at the piano alone in his apartment. He had multiple projects he worked on and revised. Other times he was at the home of friends, playing for various social gatherings and music get-togethers. There were many artists wanting background music as they worked on their crafts. Many had a piano in their studio. Felix enjoyed offering his talents as he liked watching the paintings and pottery form into works of art. On one occasion, at a small gathering of a few men, in a beautiful apartment decorated in lush green indoor plants, and which contained an open balcony of fine carved stone, Felix improvised various segments of operas on a fine piano. The music's sound echoed as it bounced off the marble-paneled flooring. Shades of brick red and orange, lined with a tan hue, colored the room. The rooms were owned by a man named Horace Vernet. He was hosting the gathering of music and sweet wine. Horace was the most intrigued by Felix's impromptu skills. He suggested many opera themes for Felix to use. Felix knew every one and made his own versions of them based on the theme. The music went on for a full hour or so. After finishing the final phrase of notes, the guests clapped and gave their commands. When they dispersed from the piano, Horace went to Felix and whispered as to not let the others hear. "You must come with me to make an exchange, for I am also an improviser." "What do you mean?" Felix was curious. Horace smiled. "A secret. Come." Felix followed him to a room next door. It was a drawing room. No one else occupied it. The room had bottle green wallpaper on the upper half, and fine glossed wood paneling on the bottom. A heavy wood table sat in the middle. A large open corner had a nice chair. Horace gestured to Felix to sit in the chair. Felix complied, but was still curious, as Horace wouldn't give a say as to why he took him aside. Yet, like a child, he couldn't conceal his reasoning long. "Have you some time to spare?" he asked, setting up a canvas. He wanted to paint Felix. Of course, Felix consented. He then, in humor, made a funny face as Horace looked at him to start drawing. Horace laughed and asked, "May you pose casually with a happy expression? I'd like a cheery picture." Felix crossed his legs, posing with elegance, and gave a slight smile, yet not too much. Smiling too much for a picture wasn't considered a decent look, as it was considered too silly. Horace, though, encouraged, "Smile a hair more." Felix slightly moved his mouth, but didn't want his gritty teeth showing. Horace then went to a cabinet and grabbed a cloth, a canister of water, and a jar of powder. He dampened the cloth, put some of the powder on it, then handed it to Felix. "If you're shy of your teeth, this will clean them." Felix took it and cleaned his teeth with the salty dental powder, feeling much better. He hadn't paid much attention to his teeth since traveling. The most common way of brushing was finding a birch twig and fraying the end to use that, but without any salt or cleaner, they became quite unpleasant. Horace seemed to be the sort that took more care of his teeth than most. He noticed some of Felix's teeth were causing him an ache, so he suggested, "You know, you could go to the barber. They might have something to help." "If I remember to clean them, it will be fine. I've been traveling so much and I don't get good means of cleaning them. A barber will just find some to pull out, and I'm not going for that. My sister had a tooth pulled, and sent me a letter telling me of the ache." He scrubbed his teeth more. After getting decently clean teeth, Felix smiled for the painting. "Perfect," Horace sketched an outline. It took an hour or so to get the pleasing picture that Horace wanted. They chatted in the meantime as Horace carefully gave the canvas brush strokes of color. When the painting was finished, Horace stepped back. "Tell me what you think." Felix went to the canvas and saw a picture of much likeness. He told Horace, "Surely you aren't an improviser. You are a professional." "You think?" He picked up the portrait, noticing his own mistakes. Felix saw no flaws, but asked, "Didn't you want to paint a smile?" "I wanted it to look refined, but just wanted to see you smile," Horace chuckled as he unpinned the canvas, rolling up the painting. He handed it to Felix. "It shall be yours, for playing so good at the piano." "Thanks." Felix took the handheld-sized roll. The both of them joined the other guests until the gathering ended in the evening. When Felix returned to his apartment, he progressed on his craft of composing. He deemed the Bride's Overture finished. Now his energies could go to the symphonies in progress, such as the Scotch and the Italian one, both in which were haunting his brain. In the midst of the joy of composing in Rome, bad weather gave to reality. The room became cold, and the stone floors felt like ice. It was winter, but instead of a cold blanketed snow, it was a bitter, frosty breeze. The wind blew the shutters open, blowing dust and leaves in. When rain hit, it made a sopping mess all around the window. Felix remained in the bedroom, in bed on such days to keep warm. The last thing he wanted was to catch a chill. When hiding in the bedroom from the weather, Felix took the time to sort through letters. Some were being halted or arriving late due to the occurrence that happened in Venice. All of the letters containing music had been sent back to him in Rome. The one that he had sent to Bryant had gone through, but it had been delayed, causing a delayed reply. Some letters were lost in the matter. Felix figured it would all resolve on its own time. Abraham sent a letter of information that gave worry to Felix. Goethe was not in good health, and it was likely his time to die in the coming year or so. The thought crushed Felix, but he knew from his leaving Goethe's home in Weimar it was to be the last. Yet the old poet's time was not yet, so he didn't let the somberness depress him. Felix continued sightseeing with some English friends he happened upon. Since Rome was large, people from all over came to the city. Unlike the Italian countryside and villages where no one knew a word of German or English, he was able to find many friends to speak fluently to. He felt though at times his tongue was confused in languages and mixed about in his head. One of the interesting places Felix happened upon gave much interest. A large home came into view while riding in the carriage. An English lady in a fine dress mentioned to Felix, "That place contains a large collection of fresco paintings. It used to be owned by a man by the name of Bartholdi." You are speaking of my late uncle, Jacob Bartholdi. I was told of his home in Rome, but didn't think it was this grand. Felix couldn't wait to see the inside of it. Jacob had been a leading patron of the fresco technique of painting. Various artists had done up an entire room in the home. Since Jacob's death, 2 English ladies had purchased the home. Felix found things that had been either redecorated or restored. The wall of frescoes was left alone, but the room itself had been made into boarding quarters. All in all, it was done up nice. Felix got to see his uncle's portrait as well. It was all striking to him, as it was the only time he'd visited the Bartholdi residence. It surprised him. The art made him feel an inclination to start painting and sketching again.